Well, hello and a warm welcome to you all. My name is Mark Morley. I'm the training manager for the Good Governance Academy. Today, I'm delighted to be hosting another showcase webinar featuring one of our endorsed training courses. As always, it's great to have so much interest in these events and nice to see so many returning guests. Please do let us know where you're from in the chat window below. I hope it's somewhere warmer and dry than here in Cape Town. While people continue to join, I'll share some tips for those not familiar with Zoom. If you can't see the control panel on your screen, please press the Alt key on your keyboard. That will give you access to the chat box, the question box, and the reaction buttons. Our speakers love to see your reactions, so please do make good use of these during the session. If you have any questions during the event, please pop these in the question box. I'll be happy to ask these during the Q&A session later on. And please do feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts and experiences and also connect with each other. I'll be sharing our own LinkedIn details shortly. For those who are not familiar with the Good Governance Academy, we're a non-profit organisation that was established by Professor Mervyn King in 2019. We collaborate with universities, business schools, professional bodies and other organisations all around the world to educate and empower leadership to uncover, address and overcome critical business issues. We run regular webinars on current topics as a service to our growing community. And if you'd like to see what we have planned, please head over to our events page, which I'll post a link to in the chat window below. I'd also encourage you to join our mailing list and follow us on LinkedIn to be kept informed of forthcoming events. In addition to the webinars, we host colloquia twice a year. These are high-profile events which have been attended by thousands of people. The output of these is shared with over 5 million professionals throughout our support member network. We also run these showcase events to promote courses which the Academy has endorsed. The endorsement program is available to any organisation and involves an assessment against specific criteria. The courses we endorse are those we feel address business critical issues, provide users with current and relevant content, and are internationally applicable. Endorsement is available for courses of all formats, online, in person, and hybrid. So if you have a course you'd like to put forward, please visit our training page or drop me an email. I'll include my details in the chat box. Anyone who registers for an endorsed course through the GGA will receive our certificate of attendance, and these certificates are CPD accredited by the GGA's support members. So on to today's showcase, which actually ties in nicely with our last showcase where we looked at Fluid Rock's ISO 37000 certification. Today, we're delighted to welcome Gary Hardy from Executive Education Online to discuss their Good Governance short course, which is part of their Executive Leadership series. This course is aligned with the ISO standard that takes a high-level view and is presented as a handbook and a leadership guide in non-technical business language. Gary will share with us how and why he developed this course, and including some of the challenges faced by conventional training, and we'll discuss the real need and value for good governance, and then we'll hand over later to our CEO, Carolyn Chalmers, for some insights on the various stakeholders, along with a dip into the course itself. So just allow me a moment to bring up our presentation and then we'll carry on. Okay, so if you can take us on to the next slide. Perfect. So before I hand over to Gary, and sorry for the interruption there, before I hand over to Gary, I just wanted to highlight that, as I mentioned earlier, Executive Education have created a leadership series. This is number 2 in that series. And they've been quite deliberate in the topics that they've addressed. Governance is a cornerstone of their education, and each of the courses ties in closely with our own areas of focus, including the outcomes-based governance, conscious corporate leadership, and sustainable value creation. Their aim is to educate decision makers to make the right choices for the right outcomes. So this training partnership is one that we're really excited to share with our community. So a warm welcome to our panel today, Gary and Carolyn. It's lovely to see you. Thanks so much for joining. Gary, to this point, I can hand over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, look, it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity and in particular to share this course with you. Carolyn has worked with us for a long, long time and in particular helped develop this particular course. So thanks, Carolyn, very much for sharing this presentation with me. And please chip in if you want to as I present. As Mark mentioned, these 5 courses are our current focus based on what we believe to be critical issues to do with technology and the networked business ecosystem. Everyone knows that we're no longer connected just through physical means, and technology has just exploded, really, the way in which we interact with others. So one of the key topics here are business relationships. The way we've approached our courses has allowed us to produce new versions very, very quickly. I'll come on and explain how to do that, because one of the challenges with education is being current. And some of the traditional approaches we took in the past would take us even years to produce a new version, whereas now what we've managed to pull off is instantaneous updating. So learners will get immediately a new version should we feel we need to make that adjustment, just like having a new piece of software. And going forward, no doubt we'll add more topics as more and more critical topics spring to mind, together with the Institute and the Academy. So, historically, it's always been my passion to help organizations drive value from technology and also to adopt good practices. And it's not been easy. Some of you may know that I'm one of the originators of the COBIT IT governance framework that was intended years ago to be a common language for everybody. The truth is, it's been a bit of a struggle. And there's always been this gap between people in a leadership position and experts, the people who've really dived in deep to technical topics or good management practices. The gap ends up becoming a governance challenge, because we'll end up with poor decision making, a lack of leadership, a lack of oversight, and particularly in the technology area, a situation where experts end up doing things in a vacuum on their own, and sadly can often lead to a failed initiative and even a very expensive experience. And so what we've been thinking is that, while typically experts need to learn and use standards and good practices, like the ISO standard, executives need something easier to digest and apply, so they can then communicate and work with the experts to properly own and guide the work that needs to be done. We also think that experts would benefit from a simpler language to improve the dialogue. It even gets into things like emotional intelligence and empathy, that if we have this kind of standoff between people who talk a different language, people who can't explain clearly what they're trying to do, it ends up with a gap and a standoff. So these new courses, and it's taken a while to figure this through, to be honest. It's probably, I think, looking back at it now, it's a 2-year development that we've been doing. So our new courses have been deliberately designed to fill this particular gap that we feel hasn't really been tackled in the past. Mark, could you go to the next slide? So over the past 3 years, we've researched this very carefully. And one of the great things that have happened in recent times is a big transformation, not just in technology and business, but technology and education, the so-called edutech wave, which is transforming not just this kind of education, but frankly, education everywhere. I mean, even my grandchildren's experience currently at school is nothing like it was a few years ago. Some of it was facilitated, kind of sadly because of COVID, but in fact, one of the few benefits of COVID was that we did make a leap towards virtual communication and much better tools for helping people do things online. And so we've been able to look into this deeply and overcome some of the frustrations we've had in the past with traditional and expensive training that, to be honest, didn't really lead to much business change. That it might have led to, more certified people and more experts. But in our experience over now 20 years, I can't honestly say that a good proportion of those courses actually made a massive difference, or even a small difference. So now with these new tools and techniques, not only can we make the learning experience more stimulating and productive, but also dramatically reduce the cost and the development effort. We're using AI and other tools to speed up the production. And at the end of the day, this is going to help us, as I said before, produce things more quickly, more nimbly, and more flexibly, but also for the end user and for ourselves, drop the cost, which I felt over the years was getting more and more, out of reach. So all these courses, and this particular course as well, follow a very carefully designed template that we think is suitable for the executive type of learner. And rather than cramming hundreds of slides into an intense course schedule, our approach is to provide accessible resources used as and when needed. They're all structured in the same way, based on addressing 4 key questions expressed as these 4 R's. They are simple. They're a simple way of describing what governance is and what leaders should be doing and should be driving, which is simply doing things right. Governance itself is not an easy topic to explain, is misunderstood by many people. And so what we've tried to do is avoid technical terms and just use language which is very straightforward and hopefully understandable no matter where you are in whichever environment. Mark, could you go to the next slide? So the course, like all the other courses, is created using what we call an interactive ebook. And this gives an opportunity, and look, we've limited the book to about 90 pages, even 90 pages. I wish I could get it down to fewer. It's a real struggle to compress what can be a complex topic into something much simpler, but for the moment, that's what we've limited it to. And the interactive ebook provides a much easier interface than the traditional LMSs, a much cheaper interface, to be honest. And it's not just for the user, it's also for us as developers. It's a much more flexible tool. It gives a lot more power with things like multimedia and so forth. If the course were to be done in one session, it would probably take about 8 hours. And that's what we've said would be the CPE equivalent. But we encourage this to be self-paced. There's no need to cram it into one go necessarily. And to be honest, we want people to see this more like a go-to reference guide used whenever the need arises. A little bit like a driving manual, because there will be issues that will arise differently in different organizations as a priority. And, it's important to perhaps go back to a particular topic or a particular issue and look at the guidance and say, well, okay, if we follow these steps, that might save us an awful lot of wasted time and actually get to a much quicker outcome that's successful than we might have done if we'd not thought about that. And to be honest, most people who do a course, if you ask them about it 6 months later, they won't remember that much. And so, what we've decided to do is allow this to be, well, for as long as anyone wants, to be honest, at the access, and to encourage people to see it as a reference point. The design we've put in also helps, and I think Carolyn will show this when we a little bit later, how this works. It allows you to prioritize a topic and then jump to that section. So it's kind of adapt the flow to fit the need. Mark, and then just to, of course, mention, as Mark said, because if you complete this course, and completion means getting to the end and doing the feedback, then you'll get your certificate of completion from the Academy. Mark, could you go to the next slide? So, as I said, the content is organized as 4 sections according to the 4 R's. And the idea is it's almost like a life cycle of continual application, starting with, the things that are important and eventually measuring whether we've achieved beneficial outcomes. And each of those sections has 3 topics, and we presented them like a cookbook. It was based on a great experience we had with one of our big clients, actually just during the COVID era, where rather than or trying to explain something in a way that's very, very practical and easy, we adopted this cookbook way of thinking, which explains in the first step, here's how, a little bit like the recipe. This is what you need, which is a little bit like the ingredients. So the key inputs, even the culture that you might need, the things that would make it actually happen successfully. And then the third part is a bit like a cook's tip, what can go wrong? And unfortunately, things will go wrong. And, as a leader, it's important to anticipate those things and steer things in, to correct mistakes. In this particular course, we've taken the course topics directly from the ISO standard, but then arranged them according to the 4Rs. So the guidance can be, shown as steps to be taken in a cyclical manner. And then rather than simply repeating what's actually in the standard, we've converted that guidance into plain business language, but using videos, audios, and graphics to provide a more stimulating interactive experience. So there's very little text, very little technical terminology, but rather we hope interesting, stimulating, and forceful points that leaders ought to understand and apply to drive things, as opposed to get into the detail of actual application, which hopefully the experts, if needed, can support. Mark, could you go to the next slide? So why do I think, you should do this course? I mean, it's all very well, producing things like this, but I think, the real challenge is adoption. And, like the Good Governance Academy, education has become our passion. It's not something I might have thought was going to be the case years ago. I mean, when I did, my background originally is computer science. Over 30 to 40 odd years, I became very involved in good practices and helping to drive a number of the good practices in the technology space. I had a career for a while as an auditor. I then became a consultant, but somehow I've realized that even from my school days and now with grandchildren, education, I've suddenly realized makes such a difference if it's done well. And sadly, it's not always done that well. And so what we've really tried to do this time is come up with something different that we think will be much more likely to be useful and successful. And, good governance is not an easy topic. Governance itself, as I think I mentioned before, is described in many different ways. In some parts of the world, it's even, even avoided as a topic. In many places, it's become a tick box way of thinking. The coupling of governance with risk and compliance, has made it too narrow a thought. I think, governance is always to do really with value creation and value delivery and stakeholder involvement. And thanks to the Good Governance Academy, we've opened this difficult topic in a much more meaningful way. And so if we believe in that, education is very important. Otherwise, we'll just discuss this as technical people in a closed group, but not share the real understanding of how to apply, this good thinking. So we've got to influence and make change and help decision makers and those that can influence change understand how it can be done. And that's why, we're convinced and become a top, well, the only priority now as a business for us is educating leaders. That's really our whole mission for the future. So there's a window of opportunity because there's never been a greater interest in this topic. The environment, a focus on social responsibility, a younger generation that's frustrated with the attitude of large corporates and even some government, functions, are looking for change and up for change. And so I think we've never had a better opportunity to help leaders own and drive the change towards good governance. And that's obviously what we're hoping and expecting this course to contribute to. But I just wanted to mention smaller organizations and startups. There tends to be maybe a tradition or a thought that we should keep thinking of corporates and government departments. They're both very, very important. But the majority of the economic, the economy is mostly made up of smaller organizations, maybe the bigger organizations of the future. And because of technology, a lot of new startups. And these people have a chance to get things right earlier on, but they need help that's flexible and cost effective and also simple to apply. They don't need or want complex, expensive help. And so we really would like, and together with the Good Governance Academy, begin to open up more and more connection with these kinds of organizations, and try and help them on the journey, because, I think that's where we can make huge impact. For the larger organizations, one of the things we've also focused on is providing a course that can be adapted so it looks and feels like the organization's own material, because that's also through our consulting experiences in recent years, we found that's the best way to get buy-in from staff, because it's in their language. It looks like their organization. It can be a real turn-off to use terminology or even scenarios that don't really fit the style of the company's own business model. And so what we've been able to do now with the tools we're using is very, very quickly rebrand this course and the other courses so they look just like an internal guide. And even we can even add in some content, for example, videos from the organization's own business leaders that emphasize why they think this is important for their people, or build in a few more elements which link it to existing approaches that can be built, that the organization wants to build upon. So we're not ignoring what might already be in a larger organization, some good practice that exists, but maybe isn't being applied as well as it could be. So I hope that stimulates some interest. Carolyn, if I can now ask you to explain the next slide. Mark, if you could go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the investor focus.
Yeah, I'm just going to mention it. So we're going to hand over now to Carolyn. She's got some insights from her research into the impact good governance has on some key stakeholders, specifically the investor community. But while the direction and operation of organizations should never be dictated by shareholders and investors, we also have to be cognizant of their drivers and where appropriate, use them to sharpen our own focus. So, Karen, we're really keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Mark. I just thought it would be interesting to add this. So it's not only an internal drive. So often we think about good governance as being, the board of directors or the governing body driving for better practices. Now, let's be honest, many governing bodies are too busy governing the business than to consider the business of governing. So, and I kind of equate it to the poor old dishwasher. We make the dishwasher work and work and work, but we never spend the time to clean and maintain the dishwasher that's really cleaning the dishes for us. So the business of governance versus governing the business. So yes, we do need to, and this certainly helps organizations and governing bodies with the business of governing, where they are always, predominantly, and that's what they need to be doing, is focusing on governing the business. But that's an internal driver. And that's, there's a big push to try and get boards of directors to understand the benefits. And there's lots written about the benefits of good governance. And we use the term good, kind of in inverted commas, because we don't, and how do we define good? And really, I think, Gary, you're going to be talking a little bit about the outcomes-based approach that you've taken that is the same as the ISO 37000 standard, is that we need to really see the results of the boards of directors, of the governing body's activities. And those results should be seen as a benefit for the organization concerned, for the company. So we need, as Gary, you mentioned, and some jurisdictions in the world have taken a very compliance-based approach to governance. And what that's meant is that the word governance is kind of banned from the boardroom. And Gary, you've given me lots of stories about this, and I would love for people to be able to engage with you to hear these stories about the different approaches to governance. And it's just lovely to hear your story as well, in terms of how you have moved from the IT world, which has been, and the COVID framework, which was largely management, but really seeing the importance of governance sitting on top of that. And I love the approach you take as the 37,000 approach as being integrated governance. But I whistle stop there really around that's largely an internal driver. It's a personal driver, internal from a board perspective in terms of doing their best for the organization that they're governing, but also for an individual to feel competent and capacitated to understand how they are governing and their role of governing. And I love the approach, and I've gone off on a tangent again now. I love the approach that you've taken, Gary, in making this content available to everyone in the organization. It's at the level where everyone can understand. So not to hold the board accountable, although obviously you can be equipped to do that, but to understand what's coming down from the board. But enough of the internal focus. What I'd like to just mention here is the external driver. And I refer to this, in fact, it was Professor Mervyn King that highlighted this research, and I've been following it ever since, is this organization called Ocean Tomo that does this intangible asset market value study. And they looked, this is their view of the S&P 500. And I need to actually update the slide because they do it regularly, quite regularly. But what this shows is they ask the investors in terms of how they go about making their decisions in terms of investments. And of course, here we're talking about active investors and not indexes and things like that. But active investors, and you can see in 1975, way before any of us was born. I'm just kidding. In 1975, actually everybody was making decisions around the financial statements. The bottom line, the board pack has been on the financial statements. But you can see how that shifted as we moved into the Brundtland Commission, the UN's focus on sustainable development in the late 1980s, through to the big disasters we've had on Exxon Valdez and Chernobyl, and the understanding of the impacts the organization has to the Enrons of the world, and all of these disasters moving through into the GFC, the global financial crisis in 2008. Of course, the emergence of the Financial Stability Board, which was originally the G7 countries, realizing that there's financial stability issues, moving into where we are now with the G20, really driving the Financial Stability Board. And through that period, there's just this growing awareness from the outside of an organization that it's more than just the financial statements that will tell them whether this is a good investment or not. And those really became known as these intangible factors. Now, back in the early noughties, those intangible factors were thought to be, like the Coca-Cola brand or the DHL brand, or, it's really about the brand image. It's about the reputation. So you remember in those years, there was lots about, the marketing and brand awareness and all of those kinds of research, from Pepsi to Coke and those books, etc. And then we also started getting an awareness of the intangibles from the perspective of, it being an employer of choice. And we've got lots of award ceremonies about, the top employer in terms of ratings and rankings. And those were very valid intangibles. But those intangibles started being superseded by intangibles like, the impact the organization has on the environment, like Exxon Valdez, etc., and Shell disasters, and Chernobyl and Gopal in India. So the impact the organization has on the environment. Also, the impact the organization has on society. So the big mining corporations and their responsibilities for the communities that they first of all support, but also impact. But most importantly, through this journey has become the growing awareness and emphasis on actually it's the leadership of the organization. If you want to know whether it's going to go right or going to go wrong, you need to look at the leadership. And of course, there's been an understanding of that. That's why shareholders get to appoint the board of directors, is that they want to know how the organization is being led. But from an investor perspective, it's more than just appointing directors. It's making sure that what those directors are doing is good for not only the short-term interests of the organization in terms of short-term profits, but also the medium and long-term interests of the organization. So needing to understand that how the organization is governed, not just appointing the governors. So really getting in an idea, a detailed information about those intangibles. And so, the emergence of the acronym ESG, and Gary, you mentioned it being environmental, social, and governance, as being an acronym to reflect those intangibles. And may I say, it was never meant to reflect the economy and the financials, because we already had that. That was in the so-called tangibles. But the ESG was really to try an acronym to reflect those intangibles. And the G is so important there. Yes, it's environmental effects, both by the organization, but also on the organization, and the social effects by the organization on society, and by society on the organization. So, but the G has been constant. And now recently, if you've been following LinkedIn and social media, you see this growing awareness of the governance of an organization and fiduciary duties, and all the case studies that are coming through where there are legal opinions that the board of directors is responsible for the organization's impacts. Really important. So just to conclude then, Gary, we keep on talking about education as being, it's in the interest of the individual. Yes, it's always good to be educated, and I'd rather spend my money on good education than to be learning, the 1975 education, the Milton Friedman kind of, let me say that, but the old style thinking that really doesn't apply today. And honestly, that's why Prof. King created the Good Governance Academy, was to try and bring thought leadership to educators, to educate the educators, to not talk about the old thinking. And that's really where the endorsement process comes in, is to endorse these courses by the GGA, to say this course will give you good thinking, current thinking, thought leadership. So educating the educators to make sure that individuals can really get involved with education that would benefit them. But the second thing is the circle of influence is not only about your own education, but the company should be interested in the education of their directors and their leadership teams, not only the directors, but the directors in waiting, and the impact that the internal organization has throughout the organization, the internal leadership throughout the organization. So yes, the company should actually be requiring their organization to go through this kind of training. And Gary, I love what you said when you said that the organization can actually take your courses, engage with you, and tailor them for their own purposes. Because as you say, and your experience holds through on this, is that, if it isn't made here, it's kind of, we don't want to really hear about it. And if it's tailored for us, we know what the culture of the organization is, and it can be reflected. So yes, there's an incentive from the individual to study and to learn and to grow. There's an incentive for the organization to do a course like this, but there is an incentive from the outside, and the outside to push the organization. And I mentioned the investors, which really, let's just take the term, the providers of capital. So it's not just the investors, but it's the banks and all the providers of capital for the organization, including the consumers, which are really providing capital as well. They also have a vested interest in the organization better being equipped to understand and practice good governance, surely, because this is the value creation process. And then just finally to mention, we've got that external the forces that are really trying to drive good governance. But it's not just the providers of capital. If we think also of the insurance providers, we've got the directors and officers liability insurance. So if the directors do something wrong, or they don't in South Africa apply, and it actually applies in the US and Australia, this concept of a business judgment rule, if they're conflicted or they're not conflicted, in hindsight, they could have made a better decision. But all of that requires this liability insurance. Now, surely it would be in the insurer's best interest to reduce the risk of the use of that insurance if you've got better education to be able to navigate these kinds of issues. So, okay, I went off on a tangent because I really do like this course. It's not, yes, I was involved, but just from a perspective of providing some videos, but I really wasn't involved in the content itself. This is really Gary's tremendous amount of experience as comes through, and use of the standard has really been very, very well done and innovatively done. So sorry, Mark, I did go off on a tangent.
No problem. It's always wonderful to hear your insights. So thanks so much for those. If anyone has any questions on the topic on external influences, please remember to pop your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll run through those at the end. So Gary, if I can pass back to you just to share with us in more detail what the course covers, why you chose to focus on outcomes rather than learning objectives.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And please go to the next slide. And Carolyn, while you were talking there, it reminded me of a story we once talked about, which was it's quite a nice link here actually, which was how do you measure the quality of the governing body of a school? And it's very relevant for me at the moment, watching my grandchildren grow up and be educated. It was, an experience that you don't have. It's different as a grandparent because you see it in a slightly different way. I'm not under the pressure of needing my kids, to pass their exams and things. I'm rather thinking, it's nice just to watch a person grow. And, I remember you saying that the best way to measure, the effectiveness of the governing body of a school is by seeing what kind of children result at the end of the process. When these kids leave the school, when they've reached the age of 18 or whatever age, what kind of people are they? And what have they ended up contributing, in the world that they are now part of? And, it's much more powerful way to measure as an outcome than, the traditional way of thinking, which is how many certificates have they achieved? What grades did they get? That's not so important. It is important, unfortunately, for certain things, but the real question or the real value is the outcome, the result. And so, this slide, my last slide, and the shift that we made, it wasn't it's something that needed a bit of thinking and letting go of those of you who may have had the experience of building training materials. There's a kind of way of thinking that's been entrenched for years, where you have learning objectives, you have topics and things, but they're all designed at the person level, and let's be honest, they're all designed with an exam in mind. Now that's pretty narrow thinking. It could be important, but it's not going to necessarily lead to the thinking of, well, what's the consequence of this education? How can I measure whether, if I use this education to make a difference, what would be the outcome that I'm trying to achieve? So we decided to drop the idea of learning objectives and use rather organizational outcomes as the end objective of not just doing the training, but applying the training. And so this slide shows what the end objectives that we decided to put down are. Driven by doing things right and the 4 R's. There are 3 objectives per R, you could say, and each of those objectives are tied to a topic in the course. And the prioritization, and in a second I'll hand over to Carolyn to show you some of this. The prioritization allows you to go straight to a particular outcome at the beginning of the education, at the beginning of the course, and say, okay, I have to admit that outcome is something we really have struggled with. It might be an outcome like having real engagement of stakeholders. In my experience, often a major challenge, but you could say a necessity for any initiative is stakeholder involvement. Or it could be that, measuring the performance, measuring the value. How many organizations have ever successfully measured the return on investment of whatever the change might be? Very uncommon. So that might be an area to prioritize. So the idea here is to have that mindset I'm learning this in order to help achieve an outcome for the organization that I work for, or if I'm an expert, an outcome that I'm going to agree with my client, that we're going to focus upon. And actually and then the subsequent test of achievement of all of this is, did we manage to do it? In my mind, I'm grappling with it is a kind of certification that we could perhaps, together with the academy, begin to create, which is almost, recognizing the achievement of the outcome, that it was done, it was delivered through sharing the experience and the case study and the journey, because I think that would also not only stimulate doing things successfully, but that sharing of experience is like a story that could be shared and told and communicated to others as a positive incentive, that things can be done in a much, much better way. So look, that's it from me for the moment. Caroline, Mark, if we can shift now to the course itself.
The case where people are quite keen to take a sneak peek at the actual course. So I'll hand over to Carolyn to jump onto the platform. And as Gary mentioned earlier, it's not a typical LMS. So Carolyn will show you around now.
Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to have I just shared my whole screen? Sorry, I need to share my sound too. So let me just get that right. So just a second. Right, and I'm just going to share my whole screen. So sorry about all of the mess behind. If I could just get out of this now, I'm going to go to the Kotabe system. So if you can you see that, Mark?
Yes.
Yeah. So just to say that, thanks to Gary for also hosting and sponsoring the ESG Exchange, which is one of the GGA's projects, is on the exchange of knowledge and understanding around the concept of ESG and compliance with the various reporting standards. But so thank you for hosting the ESG Exchange playbooks on this platform as well. So that's been very useful. So I'm just going to close that. So for people to log in, obviously you need to go into your executive education and get the link, etc. But I'm just going to log in with my Good Governance Academy email. Otherwise, I find, Gary, I'm not sure of this, but I always suggest that people go and create a new account. It's very easy, and it's want to log out? No, I don't want to log out. I'm logged in. Okay, so I'm logged in, and I can see my books here. And this is an ESG Exchange book on integrated thinking and reporting, and I'm also looking at the digital transformation one. You're never too old or too experienced to learn, right? And I just love this good governance playbook course that Gary's produced. So if I just go and have a look at it, so Gary, you've given quite a lot of navigation up at the front. I'm just going to go to the. Hang on. No, I don't want to go to the library. I want to see the chapters. Okay, so there's not a lot of information I need to know about the how to navigate it. But this chapters is very useful. If I go and have a look here at the side, it really helps me in terms of the, having a look at the overview, and it's got the learning approach, etc. The stuff that we never read, the T's and C's. But really, I like jumping straight down into are you doing the right things? And this is quite useful for me because it takes us directly into a questionnaire that says, okay, now point me in the right direction. And so it gives me the top topics. Are you doing the right things? Rather than if I have a look at the slides, and I can always access all of the information using the details behind here around, are you doing the right things? Here's how, this is what you'll need, etc. So it's really very practical. But I really like the way that this just directly jumps into the aspect. When I do go into these, the slides where there's a lot more detail, I do tend to use this. It's a voiceover, and it's really useful. I've got it turned off at the moment because I'm busy presenting. I can just show you. Let me start it, and I'll just unmute this over here. How do I do that? Mark, help. Right click, unmute.
Later
There
and
we
may
go.
even result in serious problems. Doing the right things focuses on purpose, value generation, strategy, data, and decisions. If the answer is no to any of these questions, it could be an area to prioritize. You can go directly to the relevant section by clicking on the topic.
And through the use of technology, Gary, I see with your other courses, it's just very easy to translate. And what languages have you got available now for the other courses?
Well, so far we've tested with Spanish and Chinese. Chinese is interesting because you can imagine you're looking at what for us are kind of hard. Apologies to anyone Chinese on the call today, but obviously it's very hard to handle the letters. But yeah, AI is incredible. I mean, our audios are text to voice, super quality in any language. But so far we've tested with Chinese and Spanish and hope to grow that list. And Carolyn, did you want to go to the
Yeah, I
right
do.
way?
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes. The one section, and I keep
Doing
mentioning.
them the right
Oh,
way
hang on.
focuses on leadership.
And I keep mentioning it to Gary, as I really like, well, the leadership section for me is really important because this is the
For the
differentiator.
organization to be led
Sorry.
in a fair and
This is the differentiator for me in a lot of things, is that this really talks to the lower level in the organization and enabling integrated governance throughout the organization.
laws and rules set the
Go away.
basic standards for how an
Sorry, you can turn this off. I just wanted to show it, but just to show you the kind of multimedia that's available here. I'm just going to show you this clip.
It's super important for organizations to actually be much more strategic than tactical. So if you want a culture that's strategic, leaders have to cascade that strategic thinking down through the parties in the organization in that relationship.
See, that talks to the integrated governance, which is really important.
If you want people to think strategically, you've got to, as a leadership team, share the big picture. If you're expecting everybody to go figure out that,
just a little example of how practical this course is, and that's something that came through in our endorsement process. This is the kind of education that we need available in the executive space. Is it needs to be short, sweet. Talk to me when I've got time in the car. I don't need to always look at things. I haven't got the capacity to always look at things, but talk to me, give me the voiceover, give me practical guidance. And so this is one of the reasons why we, as the Good Governance Academy, this is one of our really lovely endorsements that we did, because we really resonated with us in terms of education. But Mark, I know I'm going off on tangent. I know that you've got, Gary, you've given the Good Governance Academy a special in terms of being able to access the pricing. I think that's on the PowerPoint as well.
The last slide up.
Yeah. Okay. So for those who are attending the course today, Gary has, IT Winners has, sorry, let me just, allowed us to have a special. And I'm sure, Mark, you will send that out in the email to us so that we can make that available to others. But it from, thank you.
Thanks for taking us through the live course. It's always great to see how it can be navigated and the kind of content that the users will see. I think the ebook platform is a great alternative to the LMS. And it's likely to be more.
The LMS is the learning, a traditional learning management system.
The traditional e-learning. I think the ebook is kind of more akin to the content that executives typically consume. So so no, it's great to see that. Thank you for taking us through that. So this is our last slide. It brings us to the end of the presentation. As you can see in the background, you can see the course costs and the links to get to that. So I'm pleased to share with everyone that Executive Education have extended a 10% discount to everyone registered for this webinar. I know that discount will be valid throughout July. Just to note that the fees do vary by country, and this is to ensure fair pricing. In countries that the value of the local currency isn't the same all over. So please just check the rate before purchasing, and that's on their website. If you drop an email to the address on there, and this presentation will be shared, let them know that you're interested, and they'll return with a voucher code for use on the online shop. So as I say, presentation will be shared, so don't worry about taking down the details now. So I'd say that's it. Thanks so much, Gary and Carolyn. Oh, sorry, I've completely forgotten. We had some questions. Totally glossed over those. My apologies. So well, I'll bring up some questions. We have two in here, and there's some comments that I missed as well. But if we go to the questions, so Anthony has asked, can the digital good governance cookbook be designed and adapted to the sector or subject matter specific? Because that will help close the gap between the experts and executive management. So that's the question for you, Gary.
Yeah, look, I think it's a good question. I think what I was mentioning before was more adapted for an organization. But for example, if we wanted to do this for, I don't know, a sector like finance, absolutely. It's the beauty for me as the one, the team that I've got building this material. It's such a better experience than we've had in the past because of the tools that we have. So I think, and this is maybe something in the academy that could flourish, over time, where we have the research teams and the different groups who might be experts in particular domains. Because I can't claim to be an expert in particular sectors. My background is more general. But we could team up and do this kind of thing, and it might just be extra videos, that we plug in. My thinking has got to the point. It's almost an obsession of keeping it as simple as possible. I don't know, over the years, and if I look back at myself, sometimes I think, how could I have been so stupid? That we got caught up in trying to be too clever. And and I don't want to make this a personal criticism, of people, but there is this big danger that those of us who think we're smart, get carried away. So anything that's easy to do, simple to do, will be more likely to be used and of value. And going back, by the way, to the standard, just to quickly mention, and thanks to Carolyn also for leading, from South Africa, and I know a huge effort to help with that development of that standard. Standards are not normally easy reads. And I'm probably the worst place to be is in a standards development team. It must be a real challenge. It's not exactly an exciting environment, but this standard, and I hope most of you have got a copy of it or have seen a copy of it, is actually not that difficult to read. It's well laid out. It's not too complicated. It's still not the material for leaders, though. I'd be very, very surprised if chief executives and C-suite people, or senior managers for general people would ever read it. Anyway, but yeah, that's a good question.
The next question is you also cover ESG in your course, and how do you see the ESG road ahead?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, maybe you can answer that. Yeah.
I'll answer the first bit, and then you can talk about the road ahead. So the ESG is covered in the standard. In fact, people after the publication of the standard, so this in 2021, it was pre the whole wave of ESG and sustainability reporting, etc. And looking back in hindsight, some people have said, why didn't you because it's called the governance of organizations, but actually a good name for it would be the governance of sustainable organizations. At the time we were developing it, and I see Liesel was part of that, the South African Bureau of Standards portion of involved in the standards writing. Really, the term sustainability was so hotly debated, whether it was, just environmental sustainability and what it actually meant, that it wasn't the place at that point to call it the governance of sustainable organizations. But certainly when you look back on it, it's got all of the aspects of ESG in there. It has got the stakeholder engagement and the emphasis on stakeholder inclusivity. It's got social responsibility, which really is comes from the ISO 26000 standard, which some people call the ESG standard. So if those who have not seen the ISO 26000 social responsibility standard are really urge you to go and have a look at it. In fact, it's one of the few standards that was developed outside. It was directly from the very highest levels of ISO that developed that, and wasn't developed under a technical committee. So I really recommend that you go and have a look at that. But the other principle, the 11th principle in 37,000, is that of value generation, and essentially making sure that the organization is viable over time. And it talks to the double materiality. So the adoption of ISO 37,000 really means the adoption of a double materiality perspective that says both the impacts, the organization's impact on, so inside out, on the environment and society, but also considering the impact on the organization of the environment in which it operates and society, environmental being natural environment. So it really takes a double materiality perspective. But yes, ISO 37,000, 37000. And if you go to the ISO, I'll actually just pop it in the ISO website. There is a lot of information about it. We purposely made sure that the key diagram that you saw in this presentation is available on the free to download aspects. In fact, we are looking to try and make the whole standard free to download, but that's work in progress. Gary, from your perspective, where do you see ESG going then?
Look, as always, my thinking is always, how can we be positive about all these topics? And I think I'm hoping, and well, it's already beginning to happen actually, it is that we share more and more stories of actual application, and the benefits to be gained, or that have been gained. Your slide, the way investors have shifted their focus is absolutely important. I was chatting to one of our friends, former CIO, who was saying how, this is, in his mind, we can go on and on about the theory of ESG and all the good statements about ESG, but if we don't have examples of the real benefits, and we don't get people at the leadership level to see that those benefits can be applied, or gained, that's when the adoption will begin to take off. Look, and I think in the education material we have, what we could easily do is add in links. That slide, I'm now thinking I want to add that one in, Now, in the past, I would have had to go through an accreditation procedure. I would have had to put it through umpteen different people's, approvals. We would have had to get an exam reworked. In the past, that cycle on average, and this is on average, is 2 to 3 years, Now I can do this by tomorrow if I wanted to. And I think in the academy, if we could gather in on YouTube maybe, or somewhere, just stories. I was mentioning when we were chatting about this the other day, I'm gonna have to stop in a second. I just watched once on CNN. I was just watching the news, and somehow it drifted into this topic, and they were interviewing the CEO of Schneider, who produce the world's largest producer of plugs and light switches and things like that. And if someone had said to me, that's a business sector, going back to that previous question, a business sector, that has taken ESG seriously, I would never have thought of that kind of business. But the CEO, who's been there quite a long time, he said this was a big thing they focused on for quite a long time, and it transformed their business success amongst their stakeholders because they were using materials responsibly. There's a whole series of things, but this was just a CNN. It's probably in CNN's podcast somewhere. Those kind of stories, I think, would be the things that would persuade people to see the light, and actually do things, positively. But yeah,
Thanks,
we've run
Gary.
out of time.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. We'll have to wrap up here, but thanks so much to you both. I'm really grateful for you sharing your thoughts and insights with us today. As I said on the last showcase, I think it's important for us to re-establish governance and help our leadership use it as a tool to drive positive change in our organizations. Ethics, sustainability, stakeholder value, they need to be at the core of everything we do, but we need this shift in culture, and it will only occur when we set the tone at the top, and we need to educate those who hold the power in order to do that. So that's our driver at the GGA, and we're proud to partner with companies who feel the same. So I'll end here by saying thank you again to Gary and Carolyn for your participation today, to Executive Education for partnering with the GGA and sharing this course with our global community, And to you, our audience, thanks so much for taking part today. If you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to share these with me. We're here for you, so your feedback is invaluable. And lastly, before we send you on your merry way, if you haven't done so already, please join our mailing list, follow us on LinkedIn, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where we share recordings of all these events. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.